It's February 2026. And if you've scrolled through X or any major news feed in the past few weeks, you've probably noticed one story dominating the headlines and the memes. Donald Trump is back, and he's more fixated than ever on one goal, Greenland. Not considering it, not joking about it, unapologetically vowing that he will secure Greenland for the United States. No matter what Denmark says, no matter what the international community thinks, and no matter how many times the internet mocks him for it, this isn't 2019's random, laughable soundbite anymore. This is a promise repeated at rallies in White House meetings with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, and in late-night interviews, and it's sending shockwaves through Copenhagen, GIUK, and capitals across the globe. You probably remember that first time Trump floated the idea 7 years ago, when it sounded like the ramblings of a man who'd spent two. We all laughed. We made memes about Trump's frozen trophy. We went back to our pre-2020 lives, blissfully unaware that this stupid idea wasn't a one-off. But in 2026, the joke's over. The protests in Greenland are real Greenlanders chanting, "We don't want to be Americans," outside the shuttered U.S. consulate in GIUK, as reporters from Xinhua found just last year. The diplomatic tension is real, Denmark once again reiterating that Greenland is not for sale, that its sovereignty is not, and Trump's resolve. It's never been stronger. He's even hinted at deploying more U.S. troops to the island, a not-so-subtle threat that this time he's not just talking. But here's the thing, the internet's memes and the mainstream media's hot takes are missing. Trump isn't the first American leader to covet Greenland. He isn't even the first president. The U.S. has had its eyes on this frozen giant since the 1860s, when buying territory was as casual as picking up groceries and empire building was the name of the game. And what sounded like a joke in 2019, and it still sounds like one too many in 2026 is anything, but this isn't about ego or a real estate mogul adding a new trophy to his collection. It's about minerals, it's about military dominance, it's about controlling the Arctica region that's fast becoming the most important economic and strategic battlefield of the 21st century. The world laughs at Trump's unwavering vow to take Greenland, but the U.S. defense establishment, they were nodding their heads in 2019, and they're standing with him in 2026. Because for them, Greenland isn't just an island. It's the key to winning the next Cold War. And Trump, for all his bluster, is just the latest face of a century-long American obsession. Let's rewind to 1867, a year that changed American geography forever. U.S. Secretary of State William Seward had just pulled off what critics called Seward's folly, buying Alaska from Russia for a paltry $7.2 million, less than 2 cents an acre. At the time, everyone thought he was crazy for splurging on a frozen wasteland. But Seward knew what the critics didn't. Alaska wasn't a mistake. It was a down payment. Fresh off his Alaska win, Seward commissioned top-secret State Department studies to explore buying Greenland and Iceland. His logic was cold, calculated, and unapologetically imperial. Control the North Atlantic's choke points, dominate the shipping lanes that connected Europe and North America, and project American power deep into the Arctic. This was 19th century empire building at its most brazen. Domestic politics eventually killed the plan. Americans weren't ready to buy another wasteland, so soon but Seward planted a seed that would grow for over a century into an all-consuming American desire to own Greenland. Fast forward 79 years to 1946. World War II was over, Europe was in ruins, and the Soviet Union was rising fast. The world was entering a new era, one where wars wouldn't be fought in trenches, but in the sky, with nuclear bombers flying over the North Pole. President Harry Truman saw Greenland not as a frozen island, but as America's first line of defense. If a Soviet bomber wanted to hit New York or Washington, D.C., it would have to fly over the Arctic. Greenland was the perfect place to intercept it. So Truman did something unheard of. He made a formal offer to Denmark, Greenland's nominal ruler, to buy the island for $100 million in literal gold bullion. No paper money, no bonds, just stacks of gold. At the time, the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff called Greenland indispensable to the safety of the United States. It was non-negotiable. Denmark, though, said no. Politely, firmly, and unequivocally, no. But the U.S. didn't walk away. When you can't buy the house, you rent the guest room forever. In 1951, the U.S. and Denmark signed the defense agreement that gave America permanent military access to Greenland. It was a backdoor win-win that let the U.S. plant its flag in the Arctic without owning the land. And this wasn't the first time Denmark had sold territory to the US either. In 1917, America bought the Danish West Indies for $25 million in gold, turning them into the US Virgin Islands. The precedent wasn't theoretical, it was historical. So when Trump talks about securing Greenland in 2026, he isn't inventing a new playbook. He's dusting off an old one that the US had been using for over a century. The only difference, the stakes were higher than ever in 2019. And in 2026, they're critical. China and Russia are circling the Arctic. The ice is melting faster than ever, and the race for global power has officially shifted north. Trump's vow to take Greenland isn't just politics. It's a symptom of a much bigger fight, and one that's been brewing for 100 years. To understand why Greenland matters so much, you have to look at a map, not the flat classroom kind that makes Greenland look bigger than Africa, but a globe, a naval strategy chart, the kind the Pentagon uses. What you'll see is the GIUK Gap, Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom. It's one of the most important naval choke points on the planet, and it's the reason Russia's nuclear submarines can't easily get from the Arctic to the open Atlantic. Imagine you're a Russian submarine captain, tasked with getting a nuclear-armed sub from a base in Murmansk to the Atlantic where it can threaten North America. For the most part, you have only one option: squeeze through the GIUK Gap between Greenland and Iceland, or Iceland and the UK. For NATO, this corridor is a monitor kill zone covered in underwater sensors, patrol aircraft, satellites, and decades of acoustic surveillance tech that can hear a submarine's engine from miles away. If you control Greenland, you control the western wall of that gap. You lock down the Arctic's front door, lose control of Greenland though, and that door swings wide open. If a foreign power, say China, gains influence in Greenland, building Duluth ports and airfields that can double as military bases, the GIUK Gap becomes nearly impossible to secure. And Greenland isn't just a wow, it's an unsinkable aircraft carrier. You can sink a ship, you can disable a nuclear carrier, but you can't sink an island, control Greenland, and you get permanent forward basing for radar, aircraft, sensors, and early warning systems, all sitting directly between North America, Europe, and Russia. In military strategy, distance equals reaction time, and reaction time saves lives. A nuclear missile launched from Moscow, it takes roughly 30 minutes to reach Washington, D.C. From northern Greenland to Moscow. It's barely over 2,000 miles, cutting warning time to a fraction. Geography isn't just destiny here. It's the difference between life and death. And then there's the treasure buried under the ice, trillions of dollars worth of it. Greenland isn't just a frozen rock. It's the world's largest untapped vault of strategic minerals, the kind that power every piece of modern technology we own. Your smartphone, your electric car, the guidance system in a cruise missile, the radar in a fighter jet. As the Arctic ice retreats, geological surveys have uncovered enormous deposits of rare earth elements like neodymium, dysprosium, and lanthanum that are impossible to make modern tech without. The most famous deposit is Kivanefueld in southern Greenland, one of the largest undeveloped rare earth deposits on the planet outside of China. Rare earths aren't actually rare, they're found all over the world, but they're brutally difficult and environmentally toxic to separate and refine. And for decades, China has controlled 80 to 90% of the world's rare earth processing capacity. Even if rare earths are mined in Australia or Canada, they're almost always shipped to China to be refined. That's a strategic nightmare for Washington. If Beijing ever cuts off rare earth exports, large swaths of Western manufacturing, including defense production, would grind to a halt. No fighter jets, no submarines, no missiles, no smartphones, nothing. Greenland is the only realistic way for the US and its allies to break China's rare earth monopoly. Kivanefueld alone has over 1 million metric tons of rare earth oxides, enough to supply the Western world for decades. But here's the kick in the teeth. While American politicians were joking about buying Greenland, a Chinese company quietly bought a major stake in the firm that owns the development rights to Kivanefueld. Overnight, China gained meaningful influence over one of the most strategically important mineral projects on the planet. So when Trump says he will take Greenland in 2026, he isn't just talking about real estate. He's talking about preventing the factory of the world from controlling the raw materials of the next industrial era. Washington isn't looking at ice when it looks at Greenland. It's looking at a supply chain vulnerability in Mandarin. And Trump, for all his bluntness, is echoing what the Pentagon has known for years. Greenland is too important to lose. If you think the US's interest in Greenland is just about military bases and minerals, though you're missing the most secretive chapter of this story, Camp Century, the US military's hidden Arctic city, and Project Iceworm, plans so wild, it sounds like a James Bond villain's scheme. In 1959, the US Army Corps of Engineers arrived in Greenland with smiles, shovels, and a lie. They told Denmark they were building a scientific research station under the ESA Harmless Lab to study weather and ice dynamics. What they actually built was a small underground city, carved 20 feet into a glacier, complete with living quarters, a hospital, a chapel, a movie theater, and 200 personnel at its peak. It was powered by one of the first portable military nuclear reactors ever made. The public story was science. The real mission, Project Iceworm, a plan to carve thousands of miles of tunnels under the Greenland ice sheet to hide hundreds of nuclear missiles. The missiles would be moved constantly on underground rail systems, making them nearly impossible for Soviet surveillance to track or destroy. It was genius. It was insane. And it was doomed from the start. The US military made a fatal mistake. They underestimated the ice. Glaciers don't stay still. They move, they deform, they crush everything in their path. Within a few years, the tunnels at Camp Century were warping. The ceilings were caving in. The nuclear reactor's infrastructure was being squeezed by the ice. Maintenance became impossible. By the mid-1960s, the Pentagon quietly admitted defeat. Project Iceworm was scrapped, and Camp Century was abandoned in 1967. The reactor core was removed, but everything else was left behind. Tens of thousands of gallons of diesel fuel, PCB-contaminated materials, sewage, and low-level radioactive waste all buried under layers of ice. At the time, planners thought the ice would stay frozen forever. They were wrong. Today, as Arctic temperatures rise, scientists warn that Camp Century could thaw in the coming decades, releasing toxic, radioactive meltwater into Greenland's ecosystem down the world's oceans. It's a toxic legacy of America's Arctic obsession, and it's a reminder the US has been willing to risk everything to control Greenland, even the environment itself. Camp Century is long gone, but America's military presence in Greenland is stronger than ever. Thule Air Base, now renamed Pichafik Space Base, is the northernmost US military installation on Earth, and it's the crown jewel of America's missile defense system. It hosts a powerful early warning radar that scans the polar skies 24/7 for ballistic missile launches from Russia, North Korea, or anywhere else. It's a critical pillar of America's defense. Without it, early warning coverage over the Arctic would be gutted. And that's why owning Greenland is so appealing to Washington. No more diplomatic friction over expanding runways, or deploying new sensor systems, or upgrading missile tracking tech. If Greenland were US territory, there would be no negotiations. No hedge tape. Just unbridled access to one of the most strategically sensitive radar locations on the planet. And for Trump, who prides himself on cutting through bureaucracy, that's a selling point he can't ignore. But the biggest reason America wants Greenland, climate change, it's the darkest irony of the 21st century. A catastrophe for the planet is a goldmine for global commerce. For most of human history, the Arctic Ocean was a frozen wall and impenetrable barrier that made shipping between Asia and Europe a long, arduous journey. To ship a container from Shanghai to Rotterdam, you had to go all the way down through the South China Sea, across the Indian Ocean, and up through the Suez Canal, a trip that takes 30 to 40 days. But as the Arctic ice melts, new shipping lanes are opening up, and the most important is Russia's northern sea route, which hugs the Siberian coastline. In peak summer, it shaves 10 to 15 days off the Asian trip, cutting transit time by 25 to 35% and saves shipping companies billions in fuel costs every year. Then there's the Northwest Passage, threading through Canada. It's an Arctic archipelago near Greenland's coast, another seasonal shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific, and in the future, as the ice melts even more, the Transpolar Sea route cutting straight across the central Arctic Ocean could become a permanent shipping lane. Greenland sits smack dab in the middle of all these new routes. It's the gatekeeper to the Arctic's shipping lanes, and whoever builds the ports, refueling hubs, repair yards, and search and rescue infrastructure in Greenland controls the logistical toll booth of the future. China calls this vision the Polar Silk Road, and it's already making moves to turn it into reality. China has labeled itself a neurotic state, a claim as absurd as calling Sweden a Neuro-African state, but that hasn't stopped it from planning its own Arctic shipping routes, or asking Denmark if it can build military bases in Greenland. China has mastered the art of debt trap diplomacy. It lends poor countries money to build infrastructure, and when they can pay it back, China takes control of the infrastructure, ports, airports, railways. We've seen it in Sri Lanka, in Djibouti, in Pakistan, and Greenland is a prime target. Greenland is a self-governing territory of Denmark, with a small population, just 56,000 people, and a weak economy. It needs infrastructure, and it needs money. China has both, and that's why Trump is doubling down in 2026. He sees China's moves, and he's determined to beat them to the punch. Here's the thing about Greenland, though. It's not Denmark's to sell. Not really. Greenland is a self-governing territory of the Kingdom of Denmark, with its own parliament, its own flag, its own language, and control over most domestic policy. Denmark handles defense and foreign policy, and it gives Greenland a block grant of roughly $600 million USD every year, enough to cover more than half of Greenland's public budget and 1/5 of its GDP. That money pays for hospitals, schools, roads, and social services. Without it, Greenland's economy would collapse. Polls show that 60 to 80% of Greenlanders support full independence in principle, but they can't afford it not without someone replacing Denmark's money. This is what I call the independence trap, and it's where Washington's real strategy comes into play. Trump's talk of taking Greenland is clumsy, blunt, and politically tongue. But the U.S. defense establishment has a more subtle plan. Don't buy the island. Wait for it to become independent, then step in as its new patron. If Greenland votes for independence, Denmark's annual grant will disappear. The new Greenlandic government will be desperate for money to keep the lights on, to build infrastructure, to provide social services, and whoever steps in first with funding, investment, and security guarantees will become Greenland's most important partner, de facto ruler, even if not de jure. If the ultrasonografia sees, congratulations on your independence, we will replace Denmark's grant, build your ports, and guarantee your security in exchange for expanded military access and preferential mineral rights. Washington gains enormous strategic leverage over Greenland for a fraction of the cost of buying it outright. It's 4D chess, and it's already starting. In 2020, the U.S. reopened a consulate in GIUK, Greenland's capital, for the first time since the 19th. Along with it came a $121 million civilian aid package for business development and infrastructure. Denmark publicly welcomed the move, but privately, Danish officials were furious Washington was planting a flag in what had long been Copenhagen's backyard. It's a quiet message. Asterisk, you don't need your old partner anymore. We can take care of you. Asterisk. But the US isn't the only player in this game. China is right there too, with its own checkbook and its own offer of no strings attached funding. The race for Greenland isn't a race to buy land. It's a race to become the preferred partner of a future independent Greenland. And the clock is ticking. Let's indulge the fantasy for a moment. What if the US could take Greenland as Trump vows? What would it cost? When Truman offered $100 million in gold in 1946, that's roughly $16 billion in today's money, less than what Facebook paid for Instagram. Insultingly low. In 2019, after Trump's comments, the Financial Times crunched the numbers, factoring in Greenland's mineral potential, military value, and landmass. Some estimates put the price tag at $1 trillion Z's. $1 trillion. That sounds like a lot, but put it in perspective. The US spends roughly $500 billion every year just servicing its national debt. The F-35 fighter jet program costs over $1.7 trillion. Tesla's market cap is over $700 billion. For the price of one Elon Musk company, the US could secure the Arctic for generations. But the purchase price is just the down payment. The real cost is building Greenland up. Greenland has no inner-city road network. You can't drive from one town to another. Everything moves by air or boat. Building roads, bridges, ports, and airports would cost trillions over decades. Then there's the cost of taking care of Greenland's 56,000 residents. If Greenland became a U.S. territory, its people would likely gain U.S. citizenship and access to federal services, healthcare, social security, education. That's another massive cost. But supporters of the idea say the alternative is far more expensive. What's the cost of losing Arctic dominance? What's the cost of China controlling the North Atlantic? What's the cost of losing the race for the minerals that power the 21st century? Suddenly, $1 trillion doesn't sound so insane. And for Trump, who talks often about winning and restoring American greatness, the cost is worth a tiff. It means securing his legacy as the president who finally brought Greenland into the U.S. fold. But here's the problem, that no spreadsheet, no military strategy, no geopolitical chess game can account for. The people of Greenland, for too long, Greenland has been treated like a commodity, a piece of land, a pile of minerals, a military base instead of a nation with a rich culture, a tragic history, and a people fighting for their survival. To understand Greenland's distrust of foreign powers, you have to look at its past. The Little Danes experiment of 1951, when Denmark removed 22 Inuit children from their families, sent them to Denmark to be culturally modernized, stripped them of their native language, and tried to turn them into Danish citizens. When the children returned to Greenland, they were strangers in their own home. Many didn't speak Inuit. They felt alienated from their communities, and many struggled with addiction, depression, and early death. Entire family lines were broken. In 2022, Denmark formally apologized and offered compensation. But apologies can't erase generational trauma. This is the legacy of foreign powers helping Greenland. Exploitation, erasure, and pain. And it's why so many Greenlanders are protesting Trump's vow to take their island. They've been down this road before. And they don't want to go back. Today, Greenland's people face a crisis that's even more urgent. A silent epidemic of suicide. Greenland has one of the highest suicide rates in the world per capita, especially among young men. Long winter darkness, historical trauma, isolation, rapid cultural change, and a lack of mental health services have created a crisis that touches nearly every family. Walk through GIUK or any small Greenlandic settlement, and you'll see posters for free suicide hotlines asterisk. The call is free. No one is alone. Asterisk not advertising a phone plan, but a lifeline. When American and Danish and Chinese politicians talk about buying Greenland or investing in it or controlling it, they're not talking about empty land. They're talking about a population that is hurting deeply, a population that is resilient, that is proud of its Inuit culture, and that is deeply sensitive to being treated like a piece of property. Trump talks about taking Greenland like it's a real estate deal, but to the people who live there, it's their home, it's their history, it's their future. And then there are the sled dogs, the heart and soul of Inuit culture. For thousands of years, the Inuit hunter and the sled dog were inseparable. You couldn't survive the Arctic without a team of dogs. They were transportation, they were protection, they were family. Today, that bond is breaking as the Arctic ice melts. Sea ice forms later and melts earlier, collapsing traditional hunting seasons. Without reliable sea ice, Inuit hunters can't hunt seals or walruses, their main source of food and income. And without hunting, they can't feed their dogs. Imported dog food is prohibitively expensive in remote Greenlandic settlements. So many hunters have been forced to make the most heartbreaking decision of all, euthanizing the dogs they can no longer support. Over the past 20 years, Greenland's sled dog population has declined by 40 to 50%. It's a visceral symbol of a culture caught between two worlds. The old Arctic way of life, fading fast as the ice melts, and the promised new economy of shipping lanes and mineral wealth, which is yet to deliver for most Greenland. The ice is melting, and with it, a way of life that has survived for thousands of years is disappearing, too. And no amount of U.S. military power or Chinese investment can bring it back. Which brings us back to 2026 and Trump's unwavering vow to take Greenland. What started as a bizarre 2019 tweet has turned into serious strategic brinkmanship. In early January 2026, the White House confirmed that Trump and his national security team are actively exploring all options for securing Greenland, from negotiated acquisition to expanded security agreements. And in a press briefing, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said the unthinkable. Utilizing the U.S. military is always an option. It was a statement that sent shockwaves through European capitals. Denmark, a NATO ally, a longtime U.S. friend, swiftly reaffirmed that Greenland is not for sale, that its sovereignty must be respected. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, along with French, German, and Canadian leaders, warned that any use of force to change Greenland SE status would undermine the very foundations of the post-World War II international order. To be clear, the US hasn't mobilized troops to invade Greenland. Denmark hasn't agreed to sell it. But the tone has changed from a sideline idea to a national security priority. US officials cite growing Arctic influence from Russia and China as the reason for the escalation. Some US lawmakers frame the military rhetoric as pressure on Denmark to negotiate, not a real threat of invasion. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said the administration's goal is still a diplomatic resolution, but he hasn't ruled out force entirely. The backlash has been fierce, both abroad and at home. NATO allies warned that any coercive move by the US would strain the alliance to the breaking point. International law experts say buying or seizing Greenland would violate every principle of national sovereignty. But the US isn't backing down, and neither is Trump. Because for Washington, Greenland isn't just an island. It's too important to lose. And for Trump, it's a promise. He's determined to keep no matter the cost. So why does Trump and the US want to take Greenland so badly? Let's sum it up. It's not about ice. It's not about ego. It's about control of the Arctic, control of critical minerals, control of the shipping lanes that will power the global economy for the next century. The world is changing, and the center of power is shifting north. For 500 years, the Atlantic was the center of the world. For the last 50 years, it was the Pacific. For the next 50 years, the future will be decided in the Arctic. And Greenland is the cork in the bottle. It holds the minerals for our technology. It holds the radar for our defense. It holds the keys to the new oceans opening up at the top of the world. The US sees Greenland as a shield. China sees it as a battery. Denmark sees it as a responsibility. But they mostly just want stability, dignity, a future for their children, one that honors their Inuit culture, one that doesn't treat them like a commodity, one that lets them survive in a changing Arctic. That's the question. No politician in Washington, Copenhagen, or Beijing seems to be asking, what do the people of Greenland want? The ice is melting, the race for the Arctic is on, and Greenland is at the center of it all. The question isn't whether Greenland will become more valuable in the coming years. It will. The question is how the world handles that value with diplomacy, with respect, with a commitment to the people of Greenland, or its money, with military force, with the same exploitation and erasure that has defined Greenland's relationship with foreign powers for centuries. The ice is melting, and as it disappears, it's revealing the most dangerous thing of all: human greed. The world laughed at Trump for wanting to buy Greenland in 2019. But in 2026, no one's laughing anymore. Because Trump's vow to take Greenland isn't a joke, it's a promise. And America's 100-year obsession with this frozen island isn't going away. It's only getting stronger. And the Arctic Cold War, it's just getting started. If you want to know what happens when a superpower decides it owns your backyard, stick around. Our next video dives into the Monroe Doctrine and how America's quest for global dominance started long before Greenland. And if you think the Arctic is scary, wait until you see what's happening on the moon, the next frontier in the global power grab. Hit like, hit subscribe, and stay warm out there. Because the Arctic is heating up, and it's not just the ice that's melting.